Hi, I'm Eddie Louise, and this is the cast of Sage and Savant. We're happy to come here to C.O.G.S. We wish we were there in person with you all, but maybe in the fall. For now, hello everyone at C.O.G.S. What I'm going to do is introduce the cast and let you get to know us a little bit. So starting on my upper left, Justin, can you introduce yourself and say what you do in the podcast?
I am the narrator, and among other recurring characters, Weibo Yang, Provost Cunningham of King's College, and occasional assorted voices throughout. But it started out just as the narrator, and then it expanded, and then the narrator role mutated, and
That's his nice way of saying, and then Eddie made me do more, and then she pushed more on me, and then she said this, and then... Okay, and Emily, will you introduce yourself and say what you do in our podcast?
Well, hello. I play Abigail Entwistle, and Lucy the computer, and the stranger, and basically every other female voice that Eddie doesn't want to do. So yeah.
Especially the French accents.
Oh, the French accents. Yes.
Yeah. And last but not least, my beloved husband.
Hi, yeah, this is Chip. And let's see, what do I do? Well, I'm Professor Savant. I also do the mix down and audio engineering for the podcast. I've also, the last 3 seasons, have been doing the sound design and adding soundtracks to all of the things. I also do occasionally the random weird voices that are out there because Eddie likes to throw lots of voices at us. Yeah, that's my role in the thing. And then going, yes, here, it is a good script. It's a good script. We should go with this now. We don't need to delay. Let's go with this now.
And of course, I'm Eddie Louise. I write Sage and Savant. I also voice Dr. Sage. I worm my way out of voicing as many other things as possible and voice them off on the rest of the cast. But the thing that started Sage and Savant was a dream that I had. Literally, I dream as characters. And in this dream, I was dressed in high Edwardian, late Victorian clothes. I was in a big laboratory a la Frankenstein with the bubbling alembics and all the curling copper tubing. And I was electrocuting myself on purpose. And I did this night after night for about a week. I would wake up screaming and gasping because I had died. And Chip finally got fed up with that and said, will you just write to find out why? And so that started the short story that was the genesis of Sage and Savant. And then one night at writer's group, I got a wild hair and I went, you know, this story would make a good audio fiction, a good audio drama. So the next thing I know, I've recruited Chip and we're going to do this. We're going to do Sage and Savant. And we quickly realized we needed a narrator. Justin was in my writing group at the time, and I knew he had a perfect mellifluous voice. So I told him that he would be volunteering for doing the narrator. And that kind of began. So that made me think, Chip, I'm a little bit prone to wild hairs. Is there another instance that you can think of where one of my wild hairs took us on a journey?
Oh, goodness gracious. Which one? Let's see. We were, this is many, many years ago, but we were performing, we were doing theater in Monterey, and the family, we have 2 children, one summer we ended up being in 14 different productions, and there were only 2 productions in which 2 members of the family were in the same production. So we were going 6 ways to Sunday, and my wife went, oh, you know, there's these Renaissance fairs and the whole family could do the whole thing and we're performing together. So why don't we do that? So for 10 years we did that. Let's see. Yeah, most recently, she said, "Oh, you know, I really like the way you do these. You've done some songs for Sir Raphael. So why don't you make some? Why don't we record some of those and put those out there?" So from the beginning of our relationship on, it has been a series of oh, what weird and interesting thing do we want to do now? It's kind of been the story of our life, and it's been a great adventure.
Good. Okay, so Emily, Abigail is one of our audience's favorite characters. Everyone adores her through and through. And a part of the reason will be, and a very small part of the reason is on my writing. The big part of the reason is because you flesh that character out to such a living, breathing person that Abigail resides in people's imaginations as a friend. What is it about creating characters or building people into real that you really enjoy? I've noticed Abigail has all these lovely little ticks that you add to her vocalizations and things. How do you anchor on what makes a character?
Usually it's small things. Obviously Abigail's love of animals was a big thing for me. So I personally, when I'm creating my own sort of characters in my head, I latch on to tiny little details like that, like her love of animals, and it starts to come in, which is part of the reason that you made her such a animal freak, was because of my love of animals. But I mean, I can remember being tiny and doing those same things, making up characters. And you know, I can remember the very first story that I ever wrote was about an ant who saved his entire colony by stealing a pie. And it was just this little thought in my brain about how strong ants were that made me go, okay, this little ant he's going to be really strong. Things like little tiny details that I just really, really hold on to.
Yeah, note for our audience, it still involves creatures from the very beginning.
It's fine. I can't help it. Yeah. So, I mean, and, you know, Abigail, she started as one thing and she just kept changing, and then, especially her accent, and then she just became what she is.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't listened to season 4, I'm going to give myself 1 minute to talk spoilers, so you can put your fingers in your ears for 1 minute, and then I'll give you the okay sign when it's all right. No, I won't. That's not a good sign anymore. I'll give you the clapping hands when it's okay. So,
thumbs up.
spoiler alert, when I killed Sage in December, I had many people unhappy with me, but absolutely 100% confident that Sage would be back. They just didn't know how. For Abigail's season 4 problem, it touched a nerve. And I had so many fans writing to me with tears, and how could you, and poor Abigail, and you have to save this. And there was this huge outpouring of love for her and for the absolute necessity of me, the expectation that I as a writer would save her. And that was really delightful for me, actually, because Sage is not a character that is lovable. She's kind of a big pain in the ass with this gigantic brain who goes her own way and isn't very thoughtful of her friends. And so she doesn't deserve that same sort of, heartfelt gentleness, but Abigail does too, and that was me too. And so when they started coming back to me, then I'm crying too. I do have to save Abigail. So spoilers done for anyone who was plugging their ears.
Now I'm gonna jump in here because we had kind of 3 moments this season which were really seminal moments for characters. The first one came with the narrator, the next one came with Sage, and then Abigail.
Oh, don't downplay Savant's moment. He had his moment too.
Yeah, I didn't write any. I was thinking specifically of music that I wrote very specifically for those pieces,
Mm-hmm.
for those times, and in those moments when I wrote the very specific pieces, when it came time to writing Abigail, it was interesting because when I wrote the narrator, it had to be shock. The music had to be what, what? No, wait, what? What
Yeah.
that can't be possible. In Sage, it had to be, there was less shock and more, I don't want, do I want to say the word determination? It's like going, okay, yes.
Well, to
And the
be
music had,
honest, it wasn't a shock with Sage because that's been building towards that from the very beginning. She
but
has too
it's,
little regard.
but it's the kind of thing that the music, for that point, I wanted the music to say, yeah, you know what, this is not, this is the way it's supposed to be, but the music had to say something along the line is, you knew this was coming. You knew you had to expect this, and yet it's somewhat heroic in that regard. In Abigail's moment, I think that's the right way to put it. In Abigail's moment, the music needed to be very, very tender. It wasn't a, you weren't expecting this or not expecting this. That wasn't the point. It wasn't a, okay, yes, we're at this point. It wasn't a heroic moment. It was just a moment of, oh, life has thrown us a curve and we're not sure how to, and we need to process that. We need time to process that. So the music was very slow. So the narrators was a funeral march, if you will. Uh, Dr. Sage's moment was a determined. I don't want to call it a fanfare, but in that moment. But then there was this very lovely, soft moment for Abigail, and that was fun in terms of being able to write the music.
That's a very neat point that how you've brought in so much music through the whole thing. Um, to match up with characters and do themes and leitmotifs and stuff. And that's something that I, as an audience member, really appreciate. I often want to go and listen to the music along the lines of, ooh, what's the leitmotif Chip has added to his character now? Or what's, so it's fun for me after the fact to see what you've done with them musically. Justin, you exist in a unique place in the Sage and Savant universe. And it all comes down to us not really having a long range plan when we first started. It was, here, I wrote this show, and here's this narrator. What name do you want to use? And you said, I guess we can just use Justin Bremer. And suddenly, Justin grew into this character. Now, for those of you at C.O.G.S who bought my book last year or have bought the book since, you realize that the whole novel tie-in series is actually set way in the far future in Justin Bremer's time. So Justin is now both a human and a character in a book. Justin, you are also a writer yourself, so you're used to creating characters. So I'm sort of wondering for you, where are those intersections of character and in your own life, and then voicing a character versus writing one versus being one, and what are your thoughts? It's an unfair question, I'm sorry.
Oh, well, yeah, if I had known, I might have kept the reins on kayfabe a little better. Yeah, I don't know. Wow. See, on the plus side, at least with Sage and Savant, I've got the benefit of having a script, so that's a lot less to worry about.
Once we realized what we'd done by making you a character as well as a narrator, and once we realized, did it become easier for you to voice the narrator and to find expression within lines?
You know, it might. Maybe. I'm not sure how much that may have played in it or how much it was just haven't had the experience by that point, too. I was starting to get a feel for things. And
Yeah, we kind of stumbled our way through a lot of this, didn't we?
yeah, it was definitely putting the punk back in steampunk.
I remember, Justin, you made a comment when you were doing the audio book for book one, commenting it's weird to read my name and refer to it and actions that the character is doing, and Justin's doing this, but I didn't do that, but I did do that, but and it, you maybe could speak to some of that in the differences of who Justin is versus who Justin is.
Who Justin is versus Eddie's imagination of Justin.
Oh, let's see. I could start spinning off on a whole tangent about like the pop psychology behind Neon Genesis Evangelion and Harold and Kumar. What is the difference between the various perceived identities in every individual's mind of the same actual focus point, and then how much of that do you yourself play with?
One of my favorite things really is once we kind of stumbled across that, I get to write Justin, and I am currently writing book 3 and 4. Book 2 is due out hopefully later this year, maybe at the beginning of next year, but I get to expand his world, and I get to do things either to Justin or for Justin in the future world that are quite a lot of fun. And those who follow him on social media or on our Discord and speak with him know that current events have a tendency to wind him up just a little bit.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times when I'm writing scenes in the book, I'm like correcting ills that I have no control over in the modern world. I cannot fix the American political system to Justin's appreciation now, but I can do it in a book that's set 2,000 years in the future. So
the long haul.
That's been a lot of fun for me with Justin as a character, is playing with that. Okay,
one of the first times that Justin's character broke the fourth wall, so to speak, was the October episode in second season, where there was a new lab coming in, and all of a sudden Justin's voice was being heard by the characters, and it's like going, wait a minute, did I hear something? Was I hearing a voice? And that was when it was like, oh, wait a minute, the narrator can actually interact with the characters. What does this mean with the interacting with the characters? And so I'm going to let Justin and Emily riff a little bit on this one, because Emily had a lot of fun in that particular episode too.
Fun.
Oh, yes. I don't know. I mean, it's always, that episode in particular was particularly, let me say particular one more time. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. And, but it was, I don't know, it was just a little bit weird. But then again, it's Savant, so of course it's weird. I don't know.
Yeah, I got teased with that one because there was so much screaming.
Yes, there was.
But then in the same one, Justin's character is being electrocuted in the future. And Justin pulled a fast one on me that I couldn't believe. Like, his performance is so realistic. And he came out of the booth that recording day, and we're all like, dude, that was so realistic. And he just sort of casually shrugs his shoulders and he says, well, yeah, I know what it's like being under electrotherapy. And it was like, what?
Just toss that out there.
I know that feeling.
Or it was for tendinitis.
But there are many, many opportunities we've had to learn about each other sort of sideways that way in the booth. Partway through the second season, Chip hit me with the fact that I never wrote love stories for him. That all of my fiction, oh, look, we have a floof.
Sorry, she wouldn't stop whining at the door.
That's okay, we have a floof. This is Revelry, right?
Yeah, it's weird.
Teleporting dog.
Can you say
Oh.
hi? Hello.
So halfway through second season, he was complaining that in all my writing, all the books I've ever written, all the stories I've written, I'd never written him anything approaching a love scene or a love sonnet or a love declaration even. And by this time, I already knew the long-range plan for Sage and Savant, so I knew what was coming. But I also realized that I hadn't let anybody in on the cast at this point of what was coming, what the long range was of the story. And I realized that I kind of play my cards pretty close to the vest when I'm writing, because I'm not exactly sure how it's all going to come out. But after the fact, after you guys found things in there, what is your favorite moment that happened? It can be for your own characters, it can be for other people's characters. What is one of your favorite, and it doesn't have to be the favorite, because I realize it's hard to play favorites, but what is something that sticks out to you that was really a fun scene to act, or a great scene to listen to after the fact, or do that?
One of my favorites is still the Pompeii scene and the introduction of Gilbert and Sullivan.
No.
Yeah.
Modern Major General.
Gosh.
Letting you, the audience, in. It's really fun for me to write things into the scripts and not let the actors know until first read through. And we do table reads before we record, so they have a chance to get it. But the singing the Modern Major General was literally sprung on Emily as we're doing the first read of that script, and she gets to that line and, "You want me to sing this?" But it was
Not only sing it,
wonderful.
but sing it drunkenly.
Yes.
Not just singing.
Yeah. Yes, I agree, Chip. That's one of my favorite moments too. Another one that I'm super, super fond of is the first Christmas episode, the first double episode for Christmas, when we are in Italy and Savant is in the baby. And just that that hysterical sort of back and forth with a fully grown-up consciousness in a body that will not respond the way he wants it to. And there's a moment towards the end of the first half of that episode where the narrator is saying what Savant believes he's communicating is, and then there's a typical Professor Savant, erudite, this is the way we must think and we must do this, and a straightforward line. But what Dr. Sage heard was, wah! And I really love that, because I actually think that's probably, truthfully, Petronella Sage's MO, not just when Savant is a baby. If she is not focused and listening to him, basically probably what's going on in her head is wah, 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 wah.
I think another moment, and this is not necessarily a moment this is not a moment that the audience will ever realize, and so it's good to talk about it here, is we would do the read through, and then we would do a second read of the script in which we'd go through and we'd actually record a temp track. And then typically we'd go, okay, Justin, step in the booth and do your narrator. And Justin was flawless. Just flawless. I mean, there were the number of times that he made mistakes in the booth probably could be counted on one hand. Through the entire cast of the, I mean, it was amazing. But then we would throw
blooper reel on Eddie.
No, okay.
On Emily.
I was gonna say nothing beats me.
On Chip.
Okay, now the thing is,
on Justin.
we would put Emily in, and Emily would go in and go. She would get through some lines, and then we have very colorful outtakes. And then I would get in the booth, and there would be these. Okay, that isn't how I wrote the line. What do you mean that isn't how you wrote the line? That isn't what I wrote the line. Could you read the line the way I wrote the line? Because I have this wonderful habit of mixing around the words. And so invariably we'd have dozens and dozens of retakes going, No, I didn't say it that way. I said it this, so I don't have examples. But those were moments. Those were fun moments for me during the recording process, which were like, yeah, the characters of the various people and what happens.
Emily or Justin, do you guys have favorite moments of?
Oh, I want to say it's so much. I mean, there's lots of moments, but choices
I'm trying to
that
think
were
of how
made.
not to spoil them for people who might not have got there yet.
That's true, but certain choices that were made, like Abigail's.
Cunningham's dispatch was, speaking of choices, yeah.
That was a fun one, yeah. And Emily?
Like certain, not so much, like I said, not so much moments as in choices, like Abigail's choice to be called Mix instead of Miss. Some of my favorite little things that were put in there. And her like lines that she throws off about, I don't really care so much about gender or things like that. Like she could care less that she, is in, well, apart from like the first couple times when she was like, this is confusing, but then she could care less what type of body she was in.
Then she figured out that she was herself no matter what. And yeah.
Exactly.
And I will say in doing that, and this is not a spoiler necessarily, but it is in the last episode, there is a meeting of some of the characters and they're not in their bodies, but it's been a while since they've seen each other. And there is no, who are you? Oh, you're this person. There is an immediate response of going, yes, none of them are in their actual bodies. And yet there is an immediate recognition of those people. And I love that aspect of the time travel of the show, because it's saying that people are not the physical embodiment, but the personality that exudes from within. And that I think of all the things that get said in Sage and Savant, that's a really important one.
Oh, that is actually a big part of the background of Sage and Savant. Once I decided that time travel was going to be moving consciousnesses from body to body, I was forced to tackle that long philosophical idea of what actually is the self, and how does the self time travel when they're moving from body to body to body. And so I did a huge amount of reading of time travel. So of time travel, of philosophy, of modern physics. I read so many physics papers, and quantum physics most specifically. But is there anything you guys want to comment on or say? Did you end up with anything from the vocabulary? Or are there words that are now a regular part of your own language that weren't before Sage and Savant? Oh, that was
Silence.
a hard one. Well, while they're thinking, I have to say, Justin is, we talk about him being perfection in the booth. I throw the most complicated, convoluted sentences at him.
Run-on sentences that go for like 3 minutes.
Yes, I'll do multi-phrase compound sentences all the time with that narrator to kind of get that otherworldly, we're not in the modern world sense, but because especially important because our characters actually have very modern sensibilities. Abigail's insistence on being called Mix so that gender is not part of her honorific is one of those very modern ideas. Sage is through and through a unrepentant feminist in a very modern way. She refuses to be domestic in any way, on top of demanding equality in the laboratory. Savant is a very generous and giving spirit with apparently zero patriarchal ideas of hierarchy from lord to peasant or from man to wife or any of those. He doesn't have any of those quirks. And so our characters are in many ways very, very modern, but the setting is the 1890s. That's their home time. So language is how I did that. That's why there's so many big words in there. That's why they're there. For my own favorite, it's actually the title of the very last one is the Ouroboros Exigency. And Ouroboros is the snake that eats its own tail. It is related to the yin and yang and the Chinese ideas. It is basically this idea that everything old is new again, what goes around comes around, the circle of life.
The wheel of time.
Yeah, the wheel of time, it's all part of that. But an exigency is a situation where you are forced to make a choice and you try to choose the choice that will be the best. Short term, you don't have a lot of time. So exigencies are not places you want to be. You don't want to have to make a decision in exigency. But Sage kind of does that all of the time. So that was kind of my favorite vocabulary flourish that I threw out there. I do know they complained at me a lot.
Well, there were always sense of, wait a minute, how do you pronounce this word? Oh, okay.
We're all on our phones, like looking up pronunciations. Like, wait, no.
Oh yeah, I was taking like the Duolingo courses. I've got about 3 to 5% on around half of them.
But at least you guys were, but at least you guys were speaking with an American accent. I had to try to figure out how to say things in whatever accent she happened to be saying.
We call Abigail's accent Scottish because it's pretty much half Scottish, half Irish, with a tiny little soupçon of something like East Coast American. I don't know what that last little bit is.
Fine. It's fine.
But it's wonderful. It's singular, and it's very much Abigail, and so it holds.
She traveled growing up.
That I figured. Her parents were carnies, probably.
Exactly.
Explains the animals.
So if there is any place, time, forward or back, that you would go if you transmigrated, where would it be?
Wow. I mean, I so like, well, I can't say I so like where I'm at right now, considering the world situation, the pandemic and everything, but
10 years ahead just to make sure it doesn't,
I think for me, I would, there are a number of composers that I would go and visit. So going back to the turn of the 19th, 20th century to have an opportunity to meet Mahler or go back and meet Beethoven or go back and meet Bach, that would be awesome. But those are kind of odd.
Well, they're not odd. They're wonderful. If I could be there to encourage Alexander Scriabin to not go out on that night that he got so brutally sick that killed him, and instead stay home so he could finish his Roof of the World symphony and bring on the Dawn of Aquarius, I would have done that. But I think otherwise, I would be really interested to see the Viking Age. I would be interested to see a world where women manage 100% of the finances and the homes, and the men fetch and carry, as it were, with it. But I would also be interested to see, because so many of those Viking culture structures then filtered down to me through my Scottish and Irish heritage, and there's things that I noticed when we lived over in Scotland that I would be interested to see. What are the roots of that? Otherwise, I'd like to see ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt fascinates me. So.
Yeah, I was thinking any number of lost societies at the moment of collapse would be fascinating. Or Maybe even just
Are
going
you a
back.
glutton for punishment?
I mean, because we don't know, and we could
Mhm.
find out. And the whole reason that archaeologists start using telesensation.
Yeah, there you go, because we don't know and we want to.
But then there's, if it was transmigration, I hate to speak to a temptation to try to change things, but maybe just go like 60s, 70s, right around the beginnings of the tech uprising and the microcomputer revolution, and try and get in with like Jobs and Wozniak and that, and then just try knowing what we know now to keep it from going down that Facebookian path.
So really what you want to do is go back in the past and bitch slap some tech guys, huh? Fantastic.
I gotta tell you, I have not had the best time with my 2015 MacBook.
I
Riley,
probably
where
just
would
a
you
few.
go?
Probably just, I don't know. There's lots of, well, the future has always fascinated me. Just to see, I don't know when the future, but the future somewhere. On a, I don't know, on a slightly more personal note, I'd love to go back to a time when this thing was tiny and I could hold her and squeeze her. Now she's too big. Like the first day I got her. Or things like that. Or honestly, I would love to go back to, I don't know, the 60s and see my mom. Like, just to see what she was like. My mom is crazy lady. Like, she hitchhiked to Africa to get hash and all sorts of stuff. And I was like, she seems so interesting. And or even my dad, I'd love to just experience them as younger people that are not my parents. They're just, I don't know, just people. Love to
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, so we are coming up on our time to wind up. So if there is any one takeaway that you have from doing Sage and Savant, what would you like to say that takeaway?
I'm just really proud that we managed to make 4 seasons of time travel with a less muddled timeline than Terminator.
I'll take that. Chip?
I never expected that mixing down the last episode would be so emotionally exhausting. Not because of the emotions in the episode. We have lots of episodes, lots of episodes that have got emotions in them. I give you a dozen that were like, yeah, these were really difficult emotional episodes. But and it's just a day, so it's kind of hitting me. Just today finished the Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 of the voices and sound effects. So I'm now onto music, and when I in that process to kind of explain, I go through and I do all of the voices and sound effects kind of the way a film is done. So you have all of that audio set, and then you hand it off to the composer and you say, okay, now write music for these various scenes. I listened to all of those scenes, and I did that about 2 hours ago. So I listened to kind of the whole podcast without music, and I realized this is it. This is the last episode. Wow. What I didn't expect to love, care, or want to still know these people as much as I have come to know them. I need to pepper that, because Eddie will tell you that it comes to, the 2 or 3 days before the first of the month, and I am frantic in the, I can't stand this. I'm never going to get this done. Yes. Oh no, I hate this. Why did you make me do this? But here I am at this point and going, oh, this is it. This is it. This is my last one of these. And that's been an interesting point for me.
Emily, what's your takeaway after 4 years of this insanity?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, I'm just laying it out there. I feel like if I'm ever attacked by someone, I'll have a pretty decent scream. People will come and save me. Anyway, I don't know. It's interesting. Just more so, I've had so much fun doing this. We were at writers group and you were like, hey, you want to do one voice? And I said, sure. And then somehow I got a character of my own and I got sucked
Breakout
into
character.
it. I mean,
Come into my parlor.
exactly. Come to see. What's next? I'm ready. Let's do something else.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So my takeaway after all of this, for any of you at C.O.G.S, I didn't know what I was doing when I started writing this audio drama. In fact, this was a rejection project. I had received rejections for novels that said, love her voice, love her writing, love the story. It's weird. It can't be her first book. Can she write something that's more mainstream and then we'll do this as her second book? I got that for 3 books in a row. Evidently, I cannot write something that's more mainstream. Evidently, all I do is write weird. And I was very depressed after that 3rd book came back with the same comments. And I was telling Chip that I was going to give up writing. And he said, no, write something different just for you. And that's why I took the short story about the dream and turned it into the first script of Sage and Savant. At that point, I had no idea that it was going to stretch to 4 years. I had no idea that we were going to have 500,000 listens. I had no idea that it was going to do what it did. It would bring us to C.O.G.S in New Jersey. It would take us to Clockwork Alchemy in the San Francisco Bay Area. It would make us part of Wi-Fi Sci-Fi, which is still on. We're just postponed because of Corona, just like C.O.G.S. I had no idea any of that was going to happen, but what I did was follow Chip's advice and do something that I wanted, something that I loved, and something that I felt strongly about.
I think something that I'm going to interject here is something that we don't talk about very often, is that you had the idea of the script, but then you said, you know what? We've got this event coming up. The event's coming up at the end of May. Let's write a script so we can do this. We can do this show for that event. And it was a steampunk event at the Clockwork Alchemy. And I'm like, you want us to do an event? And okay, we got a script, but we don't have a script. And what are we going to do for a narrator? And we don't know what a narrator. And then it's like, oh, we got the script. Actually, this would make a really good podcast. What, we're doing a podcast? What do you mean we're doing a podcast? And in that script, if you've listened to the first episode, there is stabbing in that first episode. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute, we have to do stabbing. And how do you do a sound effect stabbing? Well, when you do sound effect stabbing, you stab a watermelon. The thing is, all those sound effects folks that talk about making that sound is you get a microphone really close, you get a really quiet room, and then you stab the watermelon. And then you multiply, you magnify, you amplify that sound multiple times because you don't have any sound at all. So here we are on stage, and I've got to get this sound up, and I've got this stabbing thing, and I stab the watermelon. Visually, it's there. Visually, the audience goes, yeah, we saw the stab, but there was no sound. And I was like, there's no sound. And so I stabbed it a bunch of times. The audience busted up, and it's like going, okay, wait a minute. This is going to be a podcast? Ah!
But the most steampunk thing I know is just to follow your dreams, to let it build the same way we build costumes, a piece at a time, an idea at a time, a expression at a time, until it's created something wonderful. C.O.G.S, we'd like to say thank you so much for inviting us to participate in your virtual thing. We will definitely be watching the calendar for when things open back up and we eventually can go back to normal and see you in person. In the meantime, Sage and Savant loves every one of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.